Not all disasters are natural. Some death sentences are written in water and in the silence of those who sit upon thrones. Listen carefully. This is not a bedtime fairy tale. This is a confession, a secret buried beneath ancient mud, beneath the layers of silt from dead rivers. And it has never been fully told, because there are those who fear the truth more than death itself. In the endless darkness, under the cold starlight of a time before history, the gods sat upon stone thrones, silently watching humanity like ants. No one heard the cries of children born to be slaves. No one cared for the size of the hands that built those vast cities like poisonous mushrooms beside the river. Human beings, the gods' proudest creation, were now despised like a pest to be cleaned away. Laughter, curses, lost prayers rose like thin smoke. But instead of pity, Enlil saw only chaos. He no longer heard reverence, only arrogance. In his eyes, humanity had forgotten its place. They forgot they were not born to be free. And so, in the darkness, reeking of torch resin and sweat, the Anunnaki council gathered. No one screamed in protest. No god spoke up to defend those shivering in the rain. There was only complicit silence, a death sentence signed with cold stares. No swords, no spilled blood, only water. Because water is the perfect weapon. It leaves no wounds. It needs no executioner. It only has to rise up, drown everything in silence, and along with the bodies, it will sweep away memory, truth, hope, an absolute format for the earth. But there was one God who did not smile at that sentence, Enki. He sat in the dark like an ink stain on the white stone of the council. His eyes reflected the firelight, not with cruelty, but with sorrow. In humanity, he saw not just noise, but unbloomed potential, a cosmic memory that even the gods feared to face. And this story is not only the past, it is a warning, because every time we stay silent in the face of injustice, we add another cold-blooded oath to humanity's sentence. If you want to dig deeper with me into the secrets buried beneath the silt, hit subscribe. Stay, because there are truths that need to be unearthed, cleaned, and told. And if you've listened this far, leave a comment with the number 8 as a pledge that you're still listening, still wanting to know. Because stories like this, they're not meant for everyone. They're meant for those who dare to remember. Enki did not stay silent. He only waited for his chance. And the flood, the thing meant to destroy, would become the soil where a forbidden memory could take root. Are you ready to hear the rest? When the hot winds blew across the plains, carrying dust and the cries of children who had not yet grown, people still believed the gods were listening. They built small altars by the river, burned fragrant wood, and offered wine to the sky, praying for favorable winds and rains, for fields to bear grain. But the wine soaked into the dry earth, the scent dissolved into nothingness, and the prayers, which once rose like thin smoke, now fell heavy, sinking to the ground like ash. Cities sprang up like mushrooms along the riverbanks. People crowded into narrow streets, trading barley, silver, clay seals, carefully inscribed as evidence of order. But it was no longer a sacred order. It was chaos, dressed in polite clothes. In the market corner, people roared with laughter at an oil seller slipping and spilling his basket of flax seeds. A wandering child, caught stealing dried fish, was beaten black and blue as the crowd cheered. At night, the wealthy lit oil lamps, drank wine, and argued over land and power. On the outskirts, farmers bent their backs, building embankments to hold back the rising river, cursing the god who had made the river but would not help them fight the flood. Laughter and curses blended, rising into the air like filthy offerings. Temples were still built, but they were no longer sacred. The sun-baked bricks, the intricately carved wooden pillars no longer breathed sincerity. They only stood there as silent witnesses to a faith now tarnished. And high above, where the cold dim light of the stars fell onto the muddy ground, Enlil's gaze watched. They called Enlil the Lord of Wind and Storm, the arbiter of heaven. But his eyes were not warm. They were cold, piercing every deed, every word, every secret scheme of those called human. In that gaze, humanity was no longer a sacred creation meant to cultivate the land and praise the gods. They had become a cancer on the body of cosmic order. They multiplied like weeds, taking over fertile fields, polluting the water. They made their own laws, but their laws were bought with silver, traded for blood. Enlil heard them call his name as the floodwaters breached the banks. But they did not call in thanks. They cursed him. He heard the prayers on the riverbanks, but woven between urgent pleas was the sound of knives being drawn in the crowd. And in his heart, the love once held for humanity hardened into a heavy stone. And so, Enlil summoned the council. That night, no wind stirred the stone doors of the sacred hall. Inside, torchlight flickered on walls carved with ancient cuneiform. The gods sat on stone thrones, their eyes reflecting the flames. Solemn, cold, weary. Enlil spoke, his voice deep but cracking like thunder forced through narrow canyons. We gave them laws. We gave them land, river water, harvests. And this is what they give us in return? Chaos, disrespect, arrogance. No one answered. No one protested. Because in their hearts they knew Enlil was not entirely wrong. They heard humanity's cries, but they also heard their laughter when someone else's home burned. They saw the tears of the hungry, but also saw their hands clutching knives to steal another's grain. Enlil looked around, his gaze heavy on every throne. We cannot allow this to continue. If the species is allowed to multiply, they will forget they were created by us. They will forget us. A young god, eyes still wet like morning dew, whispered, "But kill them?" Enlil leaned back, his laughter dry and rasping like wind hissing through a mountain pass. Kill? No, we don't need to kill. We just need water. The council fell silent. Someone glanced down at the ground. Someone pressed their lips tight. But no one said no, because they all understood. Water is the cleanest weapon. No bloodstains on divine hands. No soldiers needed. No blades. Just rain. Just waves. Just letting nature do a killer's work. And so the plan was approved. In silence. No applause. No congratulations. Only the sound of fire crackling on torch wicks. Like bones snapping in the dark. They made a vow. No one would speak of it. Not a single whisper would reach human ears. No warning, no mercy. They called it the vow to preserve divine order. But in truth, it was a vow of complicity. A death sentence signed with the silence of the gods. In a far corner of the hall, the firelight flickered over Enki's face. No one met his eyes. They feared that gaze. A gaze not blazing with punishment like Enlil's, but damp as a riverbed, heavy as mud. Enki bowed his head, his hand clutching the hem of his long robe embroidered with the symbols of water. He knew he could not stop them, could not argue. Any words would only mark him as a traitor, a rebel god. And then no one would be left to save anything. In that silence, he listened to the blood beating in his temples. The sound of rain that had not yet fallen but weighed heavy in the clouds. The sigh of a civilization not yet old, already sentenced to drown. And he understood. If he wanted to save them, he could not speak. He could not swear any oaths before the council. He would have to find another way. A way silent as water, soft as water, but unstoppable as water is. Enki closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his lids, he began to dream. But that dream was not for himself. It was for a human named Atrahasis. Because if the gods chose to use water to destroy, Enki would use water to save memory. And that was the beginning of silent rebellion. In the darkness of the stone hall, when the torch flames had died down to embers glowing red, like the eyes of predators waiting in ambush, the Anunnaki council rose from their thrones. The footsteps of the gods echoed on the stone floor, dry and hollow as the sound of a coffin lid closing. They left without exchanging a single glance, for all of them knew. They had agreed to a sentence that no god dared to speak aloud. Outside, the Mesopotamian night stretched on endlessly. Heavy clouds pressed down on the world like stones, warning of something about to break. The insects chirped in the dry grass. The river whispered in the night, like it was gossiping, carrying dark news far away. Enlil did not need to wait for dawn to give the order. He just stood there, lifting his head to the pitch-black sky. Not a single star shone through the thick clouds, as if even the heavens were ashamed to look down upon the earth. He ground his teeth slightly, eyes cold and calculating. They will not know. They will not have time. That was the perfection of this plan. No army required, no blades, no threats, only a command of silence. Only water, something humans could not control. The rains would fall, the rivers would overflow. The sea would gnaw at the shores like a blood-hungry beast. And in a single night, every city, every memory, every song and laugh would be wiped clean. Enlil believed it was the only salvation left for the world. A perfect reset. A blank page without any flawed ink stains. He told himself this was not killing, it was cleansing. Order, divine justice. But elsewhere, in a cramped private chamber, Enki sat motionless before a basin of water. The oil lamp burned weakly, casting his shadow long across the wall like a trapped soul screaming in its cage. He stared into the water. Water still as a mirror, but so deep it swallowed even light. Enki dipped his hand in. Ripples spread, then vanished. He saw his face break apart in the reflection and saw the faces of humankind as well. Dark-skinned children, weary women, men hunched over wooden plows. The coarse ones, laughing, arguing, but still able to love, to sing lullabies, to sacrifice. He heard the council's voice echo in his head. We are not to warn them. Not a word. Not a hint. Enki closed his eyes. His fingers trembled slightly. How could he save them without breaking the vow? How could he preserve memory, the very thing Enlil wanted erased, without speaking? Because Enlil did not only want to kill people, he wanted to kill memory. Law, knowledge, everything humanity had learned from the gods, everything they had written on clay tablets, carved into stone, passed down through the priests' stories. Enlil wanted a humanity kneeling, innocent, ignorant, easy to rule. And Enki understood. The flood would not just kill bodies, it would kill souls. It would wash away every trace of freedom. In that silence, heavy as stone, Enki whispered to himself. His voice was hoarse, as if someone was choking him. I cannot speak, but I can dream. His eyes half opened, and in his pupils flickered a faint light like a firefly. He told himself, I will sow dreams. I will give humanity a dream so detailed they can save themselves. That night, while Enlil commanded the dark clouds to gather, while the rivers began to rise quietly like patient assassins, Enki shut his eyes tight and entered the dream. But that dream was not for him. It was for Atrahasis. Atrahasis, a mortal, a small man with no throne, no army, no power beyond two calloused hands and a heart that still feared the gods. Enki found him in sleep. His voice did not roar like thunder, did not blare like trumpets summoning soldiers. It whispered, slow and soft as water seeping through cracks in rock. Listen to me. In the dream, Atrahasis looked around. Darkness thick as stars surrounded him. But Enki's whisper flowed on, painting images. A massive boat, wooden beams nailed tight, an arched sealed roof. Compartments for seeds, passageways for animal pairs, water channels, ropes tied firm as destiny. Enki showed him everything, in detail so precise it could not be mistaken. Because this dream was not just prophecy, it was a blueprint, a plan, a secret code for salvation. In the dream, Atrahasis trembled. Why? Why am I seeing this? Enki did not answer, because answering would break the vow. But his eyes dark green like deep water, spoke instead. Because you must live, and because memory must not die. When Atrahasis awoke, his body was drenched in sweat, his heart thundered like war drums. Outside, the wind had changed direction. The clouds were heavy as lead. He heard thunder in the distance, like someone pounding on heaven's door. He did not know if it was Enlil's rage or the racing heartbeat of Enki, but he knew one thing. He had to build that boat, and that was the beginning of silent rebellion. A war without blades, but one that would decide whether memory survived the great flood. Atrahasis opened his eyes. The dim light of dawn filtered through the thatched roof, no longer warm as before, but grey like ash. He sat up, breath ragged, heart pounding in fear of what he had just dreamed. The dream haunted him, clear to the last knot in the ropes, the precise joints of the wooden beams, the creak of dry planks. He could not understand why someone like him, a mere mortal, would see such things. It wasn't the vague prophecy the priests often proclaimed. It was instructions, sharp, detailed as a command. And in the utter darkness of the dream, there was a voice whispering, quiet but heavier than stone, forcing him to remember every detail. Outside, the sky had changed color. Clouds gathered thick and dark, like bruises on the skin of heaven and earth. The wind no longer caressed the plain. It howled, rushing through the cracks in the wattle huts, tilting oil lamps, making windows creak like chained spirits. The villagers looked at one another, worry etched into every wrinkle. No one spoke, but all heard the heavy sound in the air, the waiting for an unnamed catastrophe. The elders trembled, praying under their breath, lips moving to name the gods, hoping to buy a few more days of sun, one more intact harvest. But no one was sure they'd hear an answer. Atrahasis stood among them, eyes sunken from sleeplessness. He tried to steady himself, but his hands still shook. In his mind, the image of the boat was clearer than anything else. He saw Enki's eyes, silent as deep water, giving him no choice, not ordering him, just waiting. And Atrahasis understood. No one would save them. No divine army would arrive to build levees or shield the fields. Only himself, with his calloused hands and a dream heavy as a mountain. He began to speak, his voice hoarse, breaking. But still he spoke, calling neighbors, friends, explaining frantically, pointing at the blackening sky, talking about the boat, the flood, the dream. They scoffed. They called him mad. Some shook their heads in pity, but when salty winds from the sea brought an unnatural dampness, when the drizzle began to fall on cracked earth, their eyes slowly shifted from mockery to fear. At last, a small group chose to believe him. Not because they were sure, but because in fear, a fragile hope was better than standing still and dying. They went to fell trees. They cut ropes. They sawed planks. The sound of axes biting into dry trunks was like funeral drums. They hurriedly fit the beams together in the steady drizzle. Hammers rang urgently, iron cold in their hands. They panted, blood seeping from cracked fingers. No one sang as they worked. Only the hard breathing of those racing against the gods. Children were herded from their homes. Cloth bags of seeds tied tight across their chests. Mothers clutched their infants, eyes red but silent. No one complained anymore. No one asked why. The answer was already thick in the damp air, in the wailing wind, like ghosts crying among the ship's rising wooden columns. At night, Enki watched, not with human eyes, not with human ears, but with the deep stillness of water. He felt their despair, heavy as stones sinking to the riverbed. But within that despair, he heard something else. Resilience. Enlil watched too. He stood atop the thick clouds, his gaze cold as a blade forged in ice. He did not hear the sobbing, did not care for the sound of hammers. He only counted time, waiting for the clouds to grow heavy enough, waiting for the flood to be fierce enough. Day after day, the rain fell in relentless drizzle. The sun vanished, the earth turned to sludge. Water rose in ditches, spilled into fields. Everything reeked of rotting leaves, the mildew seeping into human flesh. Those who had doubted began to panic. They ran to the boat. They begged Atrahasis to let them in. But space was limited, food was limited, and the dream had been clear. Only this many. Cries and screams tore through the night. Fathers calling sons, wives calling husbands. But there were no answers. At last, the boat was finished. Crude, but solid. The beams, thick with pitch. Ropes tied tight. The lower holds dark and crammed with seeds, water jars, animal cages. They boarded in silence. No one asked, where to? Because they knew to live. Atrahasis boarded last. He looked back. The village drowned in grey rain and mist. The thatched roofs hunched like the bent backs of old people. He sighed, eyes burning, but without tears. Because tears were useless when the sky was already crying for them. When the boat was pushed off the muddy bank, the water seized it at once, like the arms of drowning corpses. It rocked and groaned, but did not break. Inside, children screamed, animals shrieked, adults clutched each other. Their prayers were no longer words, but breath. And then the rain grew heavier. The river roared, the sea howled. In the distance, thunder was no longer just sound, but someone pounding on heaven's door, demanding entry. High above, Enlil narrowed his eyes coldly. He was not angry. He was not pleased. He simply counted time, waiting until everything below was swallowed. But Enki still watched, hidden deep within the water, threading through every raindrop, every wave. He whispered, though no one heard, "Go. Go and remember. Remember everything. Because memory is the one thing I will not let them take." And the boat drifted into the rainy night like a coffin for an entire old world. But inside, human hearts still beat. And with them, the memory that refused to die. The rain did not stop. It fell thick as a shroud of charcoal, smothering all sound. Heaven and earth merged into a single endless groaning mass of grey. The boat rocked in the vast ocean of water. A tiny speck of wood drifting through the deathly silence of once green fields, of cities that once glowed with light, of temples that once echoed with prayers. Inside, people huddled in the dark, their breath damp with mold and fear. Children sobbed until they were too exhausted and fell asleep against their mothers' chests. The elders muttered prayers, invoking the names of gods that now rang hollow, for they knew there was no one left listening. Atrahasis leaned against a beam of the boat, eyes wide open, staring at the curved wooden roof dripping water through its seams. He couldn't sleep. His ears heard water slapping against the hull like fists demanding souls. He remembered those left behind, remembered their eyes begging to board, remembered hands clawing at the planks, pushed away. The final cries swallowed by the flood. He felt as though he'd taken a knife and cut the rope that tied him to the land, to people, to his own conscience. But Enki's dream gave him no right to hesitate. There was no other choice, because if everyone died, there would be no one left to remember. And if memory died, humanity would be no better than the mud after the flood. Outside, the sky roared. A lightning bolt tore the clouds like a blade flaying the darkness. For an instant, in that blinding flash, Atrahasis saw the water foaming white, the dim shapes of ruins, a collapsed temple roof, a toppled pillar, city walls once proud, now rotting like a corpse. Then darkness swallowed it all again. Thunder boomed like Enlil's mocking laughter from above. Enlil truly was watching. From atop the roiling clouds, his gaze swept downward. No cities left to rule. No people left to command. Only wind and waves, his most loyal servants. Rain washed the blood from the earth. The flood swept away all traces. A world without memory would be a world that obeyed. But then, he saw it. The boat. Tiny, cracked, resisting. In Enlil's eyes, it was defiance. A small fist raised against the destiny he had written himself. Thunder roared louder. Rain fell harder, like nails hammered into the sea. Wind screamed with madness. Waves rose like walls of water, determined to crush the stubborn thing afloat. Inside the boat, crying erupted anew. Animal cages rattled wildly. Ropes strained, creaking like they were screaming for mercy. Atrahasis shouted hoarsely, ordering everything lashed down tight. Water poured into the lower hold, drowning feet in icy mud. Someone slipped, convinced they would drown inside the very vessel meant to save them. But they held on. They gripped each other, leaned on each other so they wouldn't fall. And amid that chaos of sound, one being kept absolute silence. Enki. He wasn't on the boat, but he was present everywhere the water flowed, in the waves battering the hull, in the cold rain seeping through wooden seams, in the damp, ragged breaths of those still alive. Enki did not speak. He could not. The council's vow was still an iron shackle on his tongue. But he dreamed, and that dream had soaked into human blood and flesh. He looked at Enlil, not with eyes, but with his silent presence in every drop of water. Enlil narrowed his gaze, recognizing his true enemy. Not the mortals below, but Enki, the god who had broken the decree without speaking a single word. "He didn't speak," Enlil roared at the council as storms howled around his throne. "He only dreamed." No one answered, because they understood. The vow forbade speech, not dreams. Enlil raged, hurling thunder and lightning at the sea, hoping to sink the boat to the deepest abyss. But the waves, no matter how furious, could not swallow it completely. The wind, however mad, could not tear apart its crude roof. The thunder, for all its deafening fury, could only illuminate it for an instant before darkness devoured everything again. And the boat, ridiculous in its smallness, kept floating, day after day, night after night. No one could count anymore. Time had no meaning when there was only water and water. The children grew gaunt, the adults exhausted, but no one dared close their eyes for long, afraid that if they slept, they'd never wake again. In the most hopeless moments, Atrahasis remembered the dream, remembered Enki's eyes. He hadn't promised they would live. He'd only given them the means and left them to choose for themselves. Atrahasis wondered, if Enki was the god of water, why didn't he stop the rain? Why didn't he drain the sea? Why didn't he break Enlil's rage? But then he understood, because if Enki had done that, he would have become another Enlil, a god imposing his will, deciding who deserved to live or die. Instead, Enki had given them a tool and stepped back, letting humanity prove how much it wanted to survive. At last, one dim morning, the rain stopped. No one dared believe it. They waited, ears straining for any sound. Only the drip of water from the soaked roof remained, the raspy crying of a surviving child. The clouds thinned, revealing light pale and bruised like an old scar in the sky. The wind eased, the sea calmed. The boat turned slowly on a mirror-smooth surface, and in that mirror was reflected a new sky, not black, but not clear either. A different world, strange, bare, but there. Atrahasis exhaled. The breath was heavy, dry, but no longer stung with the salt of despair. He looked around, the survivors staring at him, waiting for orders. But he said nothing, because no one had the breath left to argue anymore. All they had left was to live and remember. And far away, where water seeped into cracks in stone, Enki listened. A sad, thin smile flickered on his lips. Not triumph, not pride, just a relief delicate as a hair. Because memory had not died, and Enlil looked down. His gaze grew cold. No more thunder, no more lightning, only a silent promise. They will forget. One day, I will make them forget. But Enki had already sown the seed, and memory, even buried under mud, water and time, would sprout. As long as even one person remembered, the truth would live. When the water finally receded, it did not return what it had taken. It left behind a barren, cold land carved with deep channels and thick black mud like memory ground to paste. Broken tree trunks, roots sticking out like twisted fingers frozen in death. The once fertile soil, cracked from abundance, was now covered in a damp layer of moldy silt, reeking of salt and the stench of decay. The boat lay stranded in the mire, its planks cracked, scarred with rusty nails and frayed ropes. Drops of water dripped from its broken hull with a hopeless, drawn-out lament. Inside, the survivors slowly emerged, squinting at a light that no longer filtered through black clouds. They coughed from the chill, from the damp, from the truth they dared not speak aloud. They were alive. Atrahasis was the last to step down. His feet sank into the soft mud, icy water seeping between his toes. He turned to look at the boat, not a vessel anymore, not a refuge, but the tomb of the old world. He bowed his head. He did not cry. His tears had long run dry. They looked around. No houses, no walls, no gates, no temples that could echo with chanting. No shape left to remind them they once claimed to be the pinnacle of creation. And Atrahasis understood. This had been Enlil's intent. Enlil wanted a blank page, a humanity scrubbed of all remnants of memory, all traces of pride, all laws not decreed by the gods. Orphans wandering wet earth, easy to instruct, easy to subdue. No history, no songs, no stories, nothing left to argue over. But Enki did not let that happen. Atrahasis carried not only life, but memory. In his head was the dream Enki had given, the plan of the boat, the silent reminder, remember. And he began to tell. He told it to the shivering children, eyes red from smoke and exhaustion. To those carrying seeds on their backs, hands cracked but still warm. He told it as they patched the first shelters, as they lit the first fire from damp wood that hissed with mold. He spoke of Enki, the god of water, of memory, of dreams. He did not paint him as an all-powerful savior. He told the truth. Enki did not stop the flood, did not slay Enlil, did not order anyone saved. He only gave a dream. Instructions, a fragile hope like a flame in the wind. And it was humans who built the boat, humans who chose to live, humans who fought the flood. They listened in silence. The firelight flickered in weary eyes that slowly began to brighten. Because in that story, they were no longer victims, but survivors, keepers of a secret, holders of memory. When night fell, Atrahasis looked at the sky. For the first time in many days, stars appeared, blinking faintly like watchful eyes in the darkness. He saw in them a vow he didn't need to speak aloud. He would not forget, and he would tell. High above, Enlil still watched, his gaze cold as the lifeless sweep of the Milky Way. He did not roar. He did not hurl thunder. He no longer threatened. Because the cleansing was done, no rebellious cities, no temples gleaming with gold, no proud walls. But he saw the fire, small, flickering, but real. And he knew that fire carried memory. He turned away, lips pressed tight, his face harsher than the oldest mountains. And he promised himself, in a voice only ancient stars heard, they will forget. One day, they will forget. But Enki did not look up at the sky. He was in the water, in the mist, in the rivulets seeping from cracks in stone, in the quiet tears sliding down the cheek of a child who had survived. Enki did not promise salvation, not riches, not peace. He promised only one thing, that memory would not die. In the silence, he listened to the first sounds of a new world, the soft sigh of relief, the hiss of damp wood burning, a mother's lullaby, voice trembling but genuine, the giggle of a child warming by the fire, all of it small, all of it fragile, but alive. And that was Enlil's greatest failure, because memory needs no temple, no stone tablet. It only needs a teller and a listener. By the weak firelight, they told each other, we must remember. Remember why the waters rose. Remember who ordered the flood. Remember who whispered the dream. No one needed to write it down. No one dared carve it in stone. They understood. Even stone can be swept away by water. But stories can seep like water, into flesh, into blood, into the dreams of children. And so, on the first night after the flood, humanity began again. Not from grain, not from plows, not from bricks baked in fire, but from a story that could not be forgotten. Because one day, Enlil would grow angry again, would want to wipe everything clean, would try once more to break memory. And when that time came, if even one person remembered, humanity would still be free. They told the story around a cold, damp fire that sent up smoke stinging their eyes. When the storm had stopped, but the wind still cut through the thatched huts. They told it while breaking in half the scorched flatbread to share with sickly children. Told it in hoarse, dry, blunt voices of those still trembling with fear but trying to sound firm. Atrahasis spoke first, his voice breaking from exhaustion, from hunger, from memories still reeking of blood and floodwater. He spoke of that first night of rain, when the river rose like a giant serpent strangling fields. Of the pleading cries as the boat was pushed away, as hands reaching up sank beneath the water, grasped by no one. He told it with eyes red from the firelight, glittering with tears that wouldn't fall. Because he couldn't cry anymore. His tears had dried up with everything else the flood had stolen. They sat around him, huddled in silence, the wind whipping at ragged tarps outside. Children rubbed their tired eyes. Women clutched their babies. Men gripped wooden staves, not to fight each other anymore, but to steady their own shaking. Atrahasis told them about Enki, not as an all-powerful god with flashy miracles, but as the only one who listened to the human sigh. He did not stop the flood. He did not kill Enlil. He did not halt thunder and lightning, did not promise fertile fields. He only gave them a dream, a blueprint, a chance. And he asked, "Isn't that the greatest miracle of all? That a God would let us choose for ourselves?" No one answered, but they looked at one another, and in those weary eyes, a tiny spark began to dance. They built new huts, new foundations, no longer squared stones, no carved pillars bearing godly names, just quickly driven stakes holding down patched canvas. But they stood, and people slept in them, listening to the rain patter on the roof, shivering at memories of the flood. But closing their eyes anyway, they sowed seeds in earth still damp with salt water. The seeds didn't sprout right away. Many rotted, but a few green shoots pushed up, and people whispered thanks to Enki, not because he gave them good weather, but because he had taught them how to remember. Children were taught not only how to weave baskets or till soil, they were taught the story. The story became their most precious wealth. Without it, the fields might still grow green, but people's hearts would rot, because Enlil was still above, and he could grow angry again. Atrahasis aged. His beard and hair turned white as thin clouds, but his storytelling voice did not weaken. He spoke to children with wide eyes and legs scraped by sharp stones, told it slowly, as if carving words into stone. Don't forget, even if they tell you to forget, even if they promise you gold, harvests, peace. Don't forget why the flood came. Don't forget who commanded it, and who whispered the dream that let us live. One child asked, "Why didn't Enki stop the flood?" Atrahasis sighed, looking up at the night sky, where stars were dim like eyes too tired to cry. Because he didn't want to become another Enlil. He wanted us to be free. And freedom means being allowed to choose, even to choose wrong. In that silence, the wind rattled the hut. Patches of stitched fabric flapped like the banners of an army without weapons. And the years passed. Newborns came. The old died. The story continued. No one remembered exactly Atrahasi's voice or how he paused in certain lines. But they still told it, with hands stained with dirt, with mouths dry for want of fresh water. But the words still flowed, like a hidden spring. Long ago, the flood came. Not by chance, not a natural disaster, but a death sentence from the gods. But there was one god who didn't agree. He couldn't speak, he dared not defy. But he dreamed, and he let us share that dream. He didn't save us. He gave us the way to save ourselves. The children grew up. Some forgot, some scoffed, some dismissed it as a scary tale for kids. But there were always some who sat quietly, eyes darkening with understanding. And when they were grown, they told it again. And Enki listened. No one saw him. No one heard him. But in the sound of streams trickling, of gentle rain, of calm waves lapping at shores, he was there. Not intervening, not threatening, but listening. Enlil listened too. He did not forget his anger. Sometimes thunder would crash again, rivers would rise, plains would flood. A reminder that he was still there, still ready to do it all over again. And so the world went on, an endless negotiation between water and earth, between forgetting and remembering, between power and freedom. To this very day, the storyteller leaned toward the fire, the flames reflected in eyes clouded with age. He looked at the filthy children with ribs showing, but eyes burning bright. Children, remember, one day, the flood will come again. Maybe not water, maybe war, famine, honeyed promises, knives that sever memory. You must remember. You must tell. Because that is the only way to keep Enki alive within us and to keep us free. Outside, the night remained dark. The wind still howled through the ragged tents, but the fire still burned. Small, weak, but real. And Enki listened, and Enlil listened, and gradually that story spread beyond the bounds of a single village perched on the dry mudflats left behind by the flood. It left the lips of those who once trembled on that battered boat, slipping into the words of the young man searching for new land to till, the young woman carrying water for the new village. It became whispers around dying campfires, a cracked-voiced lullaby, a silent plea when the first rains of the season began to fall. People began to move, migrating further when the soil turned poor. They crossed vast plains, pitched tents by new rivers. And there, they told it to those who had never survived the boat, to a generation that knew the flood only as dry scars in the earth, grey cracks in sun-baked brick walls. They told it in temples rebuilt of straw-mixed mud, carved it into clay tablets with clumsy signs recording the stubborn memory of mortals. Don't believe every flood is natural, Ba'am. Asidan natural, they warned. Don't forget, The first flood was not a disaster, but a punishment. But they also spoke of Enki, and when they said his name, their voices dropped, not from fear, but from sad respect, as if speaking of a father who had quietly gone away, leaving behind the only thing he could without being forbidden: memory. Enki didn't save us the way Enlil sought to destroy us, they explained. Enki gave us the one thing Enlil could not destroy: the way to remember. And the children listened, eyes wide, not with fantasies of divine power, but with understanding. Because everything around them was proof. Cracked fields, rivers that ran dry, then flooded without warning. Temples partly collapsed and left unrepaired. Life was always perched on the flood's edge. In the new cities that rose, as people began to trade again, to build markets, to cast bronze, to forge iron, there were others who wanted to forget. They said, "Old tales make us weak." They claimed, "Memory only frightens us with things that may never return." They wanted to bury it beneath the foundations of new palaces, gilded statues of gods, carved steles, bragging of conquests. And so arguments broke out. Quiet, but smoldering like embers under ash. Some wanted to remember. Some wanted to forget. Some sold the story as divine threat to collect taxes, to build temples. Some said Enki was just another god like Enlil. He let the flood happen. He was weak. He was afraid. But in dark corners of clay-walled houses where rain leaked in, mothers still sang to their children, "Dream, my child. Dream like our ancestors did." Because when you dream, you can escape the flood. Because no god can forbid a dream. Old people died on straw beds, gripping the hands of grandchildren, whispering, "Don't forget, even if they make you forget. Tell. When I die, you tell." And the world changed again. Tribes journeyed further, seeking richer lands. They carried the story with them. But everywhere, it transformed in its own way. In some places, Enlil became the sole great god in hymns. The flood became holy cleansing. Children were taught that thunder was the laughter of the sky father. Elsewhere, Enki's name was forgotten. They spoke only vaguely of a strange dream, a whispered vision that let one mortal save his kind. But the god's name was lost, and in some places, they stopped telling it at all. All that was left was good fields, prosperous people, thick city walls, the sound of cleavers slicing pork in the market, coins clinking in merchants' hands, oaths of loyalty to kings, to power, to war. And Enlil heard all of it. He laughed, a cold laugh like wind cutting skin. No need for thunder, no need for rain, because he knew when memory dies in human hearts, the flood no longer needs water. But Enki still listened, not in grand temples, not on carved stelae. He listened in the quiet patter of rain on thatched roofs, in the murmuring stream deep in lonely woods, in a mother's gentle call to her child, in the dream of a child lying on a straw mat, eyes closed but fists clenched. And Enki whispered, "Tell. Tell to remember that not everything is handed down from on high. Tell to know there are those who want you to forget. Tell to understand that no God truly has the right to wipe memory away if you dare to keep it. Tell so that when the new flood comes, no one will naively think it is blind fate. Tell to teach your children how to dream. And if you've listened this far, if you're still listening, still wanting to understand, still wanting to remember, then this story is yours too. It doesn't need to be carved in stone, doesn't need to be written on paper, only held in the heart. Because one day, when someone asks, why do we fear the flood? Why must we teach our children to dream? You will be able to answer. You will be able to tell. And when you tell, Enki will hear. And Enlil will hear. And the world, in that fragile moment between forgetting and remembering, will once again stand at the edge of the water, trembling but free. So tell. Keep this story like a weak flame in the wind-blown night. Light it when the darkness is thickest. And teach your children, your friends, yourself. Not every flood is rain. Not every destruction is natural. And not every silence is innocent. Tell, so that no one can ever wipe us clean again. And if you're hearing this story now, if that flame is still burning, even as a single ember in your chest, pause for a moment and ask yourself, why does it still exist? Because in this world there is no shortage of those who want to snuff it out, those who want the flood to sweep away all memory, those who love to teach us to kneel, to bow our heads and call disaster destiny, call violence order, call silence virtue. Remember, the flood does not only wash away houses, land, and fields. It carries off promises, agreements, the bonds that hold people together. When the waters retreat, the land remains, but trust lies shattered like pottery smashed with a hammer. The first flood did not simply want to destroy. It wanted to redefine. It wanted to rewrite the question, who am I? And Enlil, from his throne, was eager to answer for you. You are one who must obey. But Enki did not agree. He didn't argue with words, didn't threaten with thunder, didn't offer gleaming promises of gold. He only whispered a dream. That dream didn't promise to save everyone, didn't promise instant justice, didn't promise to erase all suffering. It only promised that as long as there were those willing to dream, those willing to tell, no one could truly be wiped clean. Enki understood. Memory needs no temple, no carved stone. It needs only two things: the teller and the listener. And today, as you hear me tell it, you become the listener. And when you repeat this story, you become the teller. So tell it. Tell it so your children don't call violence law. Tell it so your friends don't mistake power for righteousness. Tell it so you yourself don't close your eyes and call silence neutrality. Tell it so that when the waters rise, any kind of flood, hateful words, unjust laws, wars dressed up in justification, poverty dismissed with scorn, you'll remember the first flood was not natural. It was permitted. It was complicit. It was designed. Tell it, so that when you hear the thunder of one who claims to be a god, you don't immediately kneel. Tell it, so that when Enlil demands cleansing once more, there will still be some Enki somewhere planting dreams in your heart. Because that is the quietest, most stubborn, fairest battle of all. the battle to keep memory. Look around you. The world is not done flooding. There are floods that need no water. They use words, lies, shouts, money, pressure, laws that cut heads without spilling blood. They want you to forget. They want you to think you are small. They want you to think silence is wisdom. They want you to smirk when someone speaks of the past. They want you to believe memory is just a burden holding back progress. But remember, when no one tells anymore, when no one listens anymore, that is when Enlil wins. And understand, Enki never promised to win in your place. He only promised to whisper, in dreams, in tears, in the moment you lift your head to the dark clouds and refuse to bow. When you whisper this story to your child, to your beloved, to yourself, when you write it down, not beautifully, just truthfully, when you dare to believe that a small story can crack open a flood designed by the gods, then Enki smiles, and Enlil frowns, and the world, even if only for one fragile moment, will belong to humans again. So I ask you, what will you do with the story? Hide it away like an embarrassing secret, afraid of mockery? Or tell it, imperfect, trembling, but true? You don't need a stage. You don't need a microphone. You only need one listener. Because if there is one teller and one listener, the flood can never fully win. Tell it, keep memory. And when the night is truly dark, be the smallest flame. Because Enki didn't choose the strongest, the richest, the smartest. He chose the one who would listen and gave them a dream. Now that dream is yours. What will you do with it? So let the story not end here. Don't let it die like a dead sound in your ear. Let it live in the way you look at the world, in the questions you dare to ask, in the words you choose to speak when others choose silence. Because perhaps that is Enki's true legacy. Not the boat, not the blueprint, but the invitation that never grows old, to question those who call themselves gods, to ask who writes the laws, to remember who silences the storytellers. Because new floods still come, without wind screaming, without levees breaking, but they sweep through language, swallow truth, muddy every meaning of freedom. And we, each of us, quietly, are the ones keeping watch on the dikes. You don't have to shout. You don't have to win the argument. You just have to not forget. Just refuse to call forgetting peace. Tell it. To your children, to your friends, to yourself. Tell it, so memory does not drown in the floodwaters of forgetting. And if you're still listening to me now, know this. You are holding that dream. Hold it. And one day, when you look around and see the dark clouds gathering, see the waters begin to rise, ask yourself, what will I do this time? Because the flood always returns, but so does the storyteller.